So Jeff Sessions today made it clear that he is going to, well, actually, let's let him speak for himself in regards to sanctuary cities. Listen in.
The president has rightly said disregard for law must end. In his executive order, he stated that it is the policy of the executive branch to ensure that states and cities comply with all federal laws, including all immigration laws. Today, I'm urging states and local jurisdictions to comply with these federal laws, including 8 U.S.C. Section 1373. Moreover, the Department of Justice will require that jurisdictions seeking or applying for Department of Justice grants to certify compliance with 1373 as a condition of receiving those awards.
All right. So too long, didn't read or didn't listen. Essentially, he's going to withhold funding, grants from the Department of Justice from cities that do not essentially renounce being sanctuary cities. Sanctuary cities are cities that have either directly or tacitly agreed not to use their local law enforcement to do the job of ICE agents, immigration and customs enforcement. So in other words, if you get pulled over, they're not going to ask you for your papers, please. And so Donald Trump is looking to end that because he's cast this narrative that that sanctuary cities are somehow more dangerous and it's more threatening. And so therefore, these cities are unsafe. And this is his way of forcing the cities to become compliant as well as safer cities. We see that the evidence does not, as with almost everything else with Donald Trump, the evidence does not support his claims. Sanctuary cities are no more dangerous than any other city. But this is his contention, very similarly to the contention of Jeff Sessions, who has a personal obsession with marijuana. He insists that marijuana is just a little bit less dangerous than heroin. There's clearly evidence to suggest the complete opposite of that claim. But this is a trend with the Trump administration. They make an absurd claim, and then they use the force of the federal government to enforce that claim, to crack down on that claim. And he's doing this with the ICE. And so there's about $4.1 billion in federal grants that will be withheld from cities that are sanctuary cities. There's a city here in Boston, Somerville, Massachusetts. Boston itself is a sanctuary city, but Somerville has let it be known that they are going to still remain a sanctuary city. Now, what type of impact does this have? I've seen some graphs, some data that suggests that this federal funding represents less than 1% of the respective city's budget. However, it is a clear affront to sanctuary cities. And, you know, anyone who claims to be on the side of states' rights, which conservatives so often use that as an excuse for the federal government not to get involved. You should see clearly the hypocrisy of the federal government getting involved in this draconian fashion in order to tread upon the rights of individual states, local municipalities. But again, this is in the purview. This is clearly something that the federal government can do. This is something that the Department of Justice can do. It is something similar to what President Obama put in writing, but not so much in enforcement. There's a couple of articles floating around that suggest that President Obama did the same exact thing. That's not the case. President Obama did make these statements. President Obama did make it a quote unquote policy, but the enforcement thereof has been left now to the Trump administration to actually enforce this Department of Justice stranglehold on these local cities who want to remain. And it's not so much that they are a sanctuary city where they're inviting you in and you're going to be safe here. They're simply saying we're not going to use local resources to do the job of the federal government when the federal government is not giving any funding to actually enhance or to support this mandate. So there's another level of states' rights that are being violated because this is a mandate that is not being enforced, or I'm sorry, an unfunded mandate. That's the hilarity of this. So anyone who's following this, you should be able to clearly see, that this is an infringement on local rights. This is hypocritical, right? This should not be a surprise. The New York Times has reported on a number of studies, which one quote from the New York Times have concluded that immigrants are less likely to commit crimes than people born in the United States. I definitely can believe that. According to New York Times, experts say that the available evidence does not support the idea that undocumented immigrants commit a disproportionate share of crime. But what they do consistently, and we saw this at his first joint session of Congress speech, he uses anecdotal evidence. He uses individual cases that do not suggest a trend, that don't have enough data points to even have probably a robust analysis in the first place. But he takes these stories of individual examples of someone being killed by an immigrant, and he makes federal policy to crack down on a problem that does not exist. If you want to crack down on illegal immigration, that's one thing, but to crack down on a, quote, disproportionate amount of crime being committed in sanctuary cities, that does not exist by the data. But that's completely irrelevant because we're dealing with an administration that's antithetical, that simply rejects the idea of truth and facts. So Jeff Sessions, he also said this in his hearing, in his session today. He said that these policies of sanctuary cities simply cannot continue. He said countless Americans would be alive today and countless loved ones would not be grieving today if the policies of the sanctuary's jurisdictions were ended. What is countless, right? We literally can count the number of people who have been killed by immigrants in or illegal immigrants for that matter, in sanctuary cities. We literally can count them. So this weasel language is being used for them to enact draconian policies on every angle, right? So this policy of withholding funds, that in and of itself is not draconian in the sense that it has pre-existed the Trump administration, but it's just one element out of all the tools that Donald Trump is using to crack down on illegal immigration in general. Countless families, it blows my mind that this type of weaselly language is permitted and allowed when in fact we can actually count the number of people who have been killed by illegal immigrants in sanctuary cities. So it's a problem. It's a problem that they're using. It's an anecdote that they're using. Yes, there are examples of individuals being killed, right? But to create a policy on a trend that doesn't exist and to utilize language to suggest that this trend does exist when in actuality it does not exist. And the data reflects, according to the New York Times, who was citing several studies, it suggests that they are not as violent as American citizens. But we're not going to do anything about American citizens. We're not going to do anything about this white supremacist who drove up from Maryland to New York City to kill black people and ended up killing a 66-year-old black man, stabbing him in the back with a 26-inch mini sword, right? We're not going to do anything about that, which is a clear and present threat, right? The white terrorism that exists in the United States. Matter of fact, we won't even answer questions about it. When Jeff Sessions was asked by a White House correspondent about this is what he did.
Thank you all.
What about the Eric Garner case and the white supremacist that killed the black man in New York? Is that a hate crime, sir?
Okay, you guys ready to continue?
There you go. So you have this reporter who's asking him about the Department of Justice and their role in hate crimes, right? So we're focusing on the countless lives that have been lost in sanctuary cities, which in actuality we can count And then he ignores the question about what about the real crimes that actually occur on an ongoing basis. Eric Gardner, that's inside of the Department of Justice's purview. The man who went from Maryland to New York City to kill, specifically to kill black people. They won't even address the question. So this is what's happening with your, and here's the last thing I'll say about Jeff Sessions. Why the hell does he have a job? Why is he still the attorney general? When if you or I had lied in front of Congress the way he did, the exact same way he did, one of us, we would be charged with perjury. We would be on trial for perjury, but not Jeff Sessions. Jeff Sessions continues to serve as the attorney general, floating evidence that's not really evidence, suggesting a trend that does not exist, and bringing draconian policies to crack down on a problem that really is not the core problem that he should be addressing, or a problem that even exists in the manner that he suggests.